from the University of Kansas Health System.
I am amazed. The team here is great.
I came on a Tuesday, and then by Saturday I had a heart in me.
I have never seen a group of people work together so good as this team of heart specialists. I mean, it's just unreal.
Stand by to set up show.
And the Dolph C. Simons Jr. Family Broadcast Studio.
Roll it.
Always makes you feel like you're the most important patient on the planet.
I felt heard, and that was really big.
This is All Things Heart.
Good morning. It's Thursday, March 24th. I'm Alexis Del Cid. Welcome to All Things Heart. Today we're talking about something that is so familiar to most of us. Eating something delicious and not being able to stop, even when you know you should stop. Next thing you know, you've polished off that whole canister of chips, a row of Oreos. Did you know there's a name for the cause of this? It's called the bliss point. We explain the devastating impact foods that trigger your bliss point can have on your heart. Also, we'll show you a special gift to our cardio team from a man who calls the team here guardian angels who saved his life. And steak, burgers, barbecue. Hey, we live in the Midwest. Red meat is everywhere. So we'll tell you the key thing to add to your plate to keep you heart healthy. And as always, if you have a question or a comment, you can share those on our Facebook Live, our YouTube channel, or just email us at allthingsheart@kumc.edu. Today's topic is junk food and why it is so darn hard to put it down once you start eating it. It can be a really helpless feeling. You might be surprised, though, to learn that doctors and scientists say many of our trigger foods are actually engineered to have this effect. These can be the same foods that are linked to heart problems.
We all have that one food,
Chocolate.
that trips our trigger.
Pizza.
Chips.
Lay's potato chips got the commercial right.
You know you should stop.
Chips.
Sour gummy worms.
Once I opened the bag,
And you just can't.
I can't stop at just one, even if I hide it somewhere in my house.
I get to the point where I know I'm full and I just keep eating.
Do you feel regret when you're done?
Oh yeah, definitely.
So what is happening in our brains to make us keep eating even when we know intuitively we've had enough? Why do we keep going, knowing we're not going to feel good when we finally do finish? It's no accident, and you are not a failure. It is intentional, and there's a name for it, the bliss point. The point in which food manufacturers pour just the right amounts of sugar, salt, and fat into all the foods we love, overriding our body's natural mechanism that should tell us to stop eating. The bliss point is what keeps us going back for more and more and more, and it can have devastating consequences.
Who's hungry? Right?
I feel like I just ate.
I mean, we're really excited to talk about this today. And joining us right now are two experts who are going to help us guide us through this discussion, cardiologist Dr. Travis Love and clinical psychologist Dr. Greg Noelenik. Thank you both for being here.
Of course.
Got to ask right off the bat. You're a cardiologist, but you must have a food that triggers your bliss point.
Yeah, all of them. Salt,
Everything
sweet,
you saw?
the whole deal. Everything looked good right there.
Right.
Donuts, everything.
Do you have a poison particular favorite?
I mean, they just kept rolling.
Right.
Each one was
like the
yep,
greatest
that.
hits
Yes.
of what overrides your
it's like
brain.
salt and vinegar chips.
Oh, those are so
I'm
good.
so weak. Doritos.
Mine are those deadly little pralines you can get at Costco in that tub. It's the only thing I've ever had to tell my husband you got to get these out of the house. I can't stop at these. It's ridiculous.
The use of the word tub just drives something home too, right?
Yeah.
Like,
Right.
it's like, yeah,
And
there's
next,
plenty
you're
to go.
sitting with the tub on your lap, eating whatever you got from Costco when you went there for like lawn furniture or something. I want to start with Dr. Love because we know the long-term effects to our health from a high junk food diet.
Sure.
That's talked about, and we're going to talk about that later. But are there also short-term effects to your heart and your body from a brief binge on something like you eat the entire chocolate bunny on Easter or that whole bag of chips in one sitting?
I like to think not, since we all do it.
Right.
I don't think that there's data to support that, that a one-time binge of a line of Oreos is going to have bad effects on your heart specifically. Now, if you have things like diabetes or high blood pressure, certainly could have an effect. If your blood sugar spikes really high afterwards, you may feel that from hyperglycemia or high blood glucose. If you have hypertension or high blood pressure, you may feel the effects of that when you eat a bag of chips, that your blood pressure rises pretty dramatically. And so in those ways, it can have a pretty dramatic effect.
And then doing that every day then
Over
can
and
really
over,
be
yes.
bad for your system. Dr. Noelenik, can food be an addiction?
You know, this is a really complicated discussion because when we talk about addiction, you know, the old school was that there had to be tolerance and withdrawal, and now it's kind of evolved into this you know, sensitivity and dependence around it. And so when we look at food specifically, the biggest controversial point of this is that you can't just stop eating, you know, so there is no abstinence from food. So what we get into here is looking at food additives, and I think certainly when we talk about addiction, I think that brings up a whole host of thoughts and issues and responses, and we're typically thinking about heroin or cocaine or methamphetamine. Sugar is really, it's more about food additives and the effects that they produce in the brain that make it such a behavioral response, and it becomes ingrained, and we start to, you know, we continue, even though we know that it has negative effects long term, we don't intervene and we don't stop ourselves appropriately. And so there's a lot of discussion around this in terms of, is it personal responsibility or is it industry driven, and what needs to be done to rectify this, because non-communicable diseases are actually the biggest problem that we're facing right now. I mean, I know coming right out of COVID, everybody looks at, hey, COVID was the pandemic. The westernization in this ultra processed food, that's kind of one of the bigger global pandemics that's spreading. So,
and we've heard doctors talk about how one of the things to minimize that can help you minimize how horribly you do get sick or put you at less risk is to not have those other diseases, that try to keep your weight in check, try to be fit, try to keep yourself heart healthy. Getting back to what we're talking about with eating though, Dr. Noelenik, have you seen more disordered eating over the past few years compared to when you first became a psychologist?
well, it's not so much that I've seen more of it, but I've seen it spike as a result of the pandemic. I think a lot of people, when you look at disordered eating, the primary element there is control. And whenever folks who tend towards that behavior feel an absence of control in their life, you can see it kind of creep back into the frame in terms of, well, I can't help everybody wear masks, I can't help people get the shots, but I can certainly binge and then purge, or I can restrict my intake of food. It becomes the one thing that's very primal that we can have control over. And so I have seen that come back in people who had kind of wrestled through some of those issues in treatment, and now they're coming back in and saying, sorry, the wheels fell off and I'm back in it. So.
I imagine so many different layers of that happening because the support groups just weren't available to a lot of people in person. Dr. Love, when it comes to a healthy heart, we always talk about obesity, right? But what about the thin person who's a junk food junkie? Can you be thin and still have an unhealthy heart from a poor diet?
Yeah, absolutely. So obesity in and of itself is a risk factor for coronary artery disease, whether or not you have high blood pressure, high cholesterol, diabetes, the other things that go along with having obesity. Obesity itself is a problem. That being said, people can be thin and they can have high blood pressure, diabetes, high cholesterol because of what they're eating. It may not manifest itself as obesity, but they can get all of those kind of secondary issues as a result of what they're taking in.
So just because you're thin doesn't mean you've got a healthy heart. And doesn't mean you can just keep eating whatever because your metabolism is quicker.
Lots of people are thin that have diabetes or that have high blood pressure or high cholesterol, so no, it doesn't protect you.
When it comes to sugar, would that be considered an additive in food?
Absolutely.
The reason I ask is because I was looking at some jars of spaghetti sauce, and some of the spaghetti sauce is loaded with sugar, like high fructose corn syrup is in the spaghetti sauce. And so wanted to ask you about sugar because we know it can raise your blood pressure, right? And it can increase chronic inflammation, which could be a pathway to heart disease. But I want to know if you guys are stunned at what we looked at when we found sugar levels and how much we're consuming regularly. Well, 200 years ago, we were consuming 2 pounds of sugar a year. That's the average American. 1970, we ate 123 pounds of sugar a year. Today, the average American consumes almost 152 pounds of sugar in 1 year. That's the average person eating 3 pounds of sugar a week. That seems freaky to me. Does that seem?
It's a lot.
Does that surprise you as a cardiologist?
No.
So,
no, I mean, no. People can't stop.
So most of us are eating 2 to 3 pounds of sugar a week, Dr. Noelenik.
Well, I think if we look back at 200 years ago when we were eating the 2 pounds, it's because the sugar was coming in natural sources. It was in fruit. It was in, it was naturally present. That 152 pounds is because now we've taken, like if you look at a coca leaf, it can be used, for medicinal purposes, whatever. You refine that and process it down to pure cocaine. That's a problem.
Right.
Sugar isn't different. It occurs naturally in fruits and things, but when you process it down and crystallize it, like here's this pure form, now we can use it and apply it in several different things. And food industry has not really been responsible and has, they've been responsible to profit margin, and they did their homework and realized that the more of that they put in foods, it gets to a point where people start to buy more. They come back more often. They want things more.
Right.
And it comes back to this reinforcing effect. And
the bliss point.
Yeah, the
is
bliss
what we're
point.
talking about.
Exactly. That if you taste something with no sugar in it, you're gonna be like, okay. You taste it with enough sugar, you're like, oh, that's really good.
Right.
And then you taste it more, but you talked about the bliss point with sugar, salt, and fat. Each one of those things on their own isn't necessarily going to produce that excitement. It's the right combination of all three together that's really the pow, and that's where we see things like, in a tomato sauce or in chips especially, because you're getting all those things. And do you need all of them in there? Maybe not.
We don't need a lot of the things that feel good.
Gets a real jolt out of it.
Yeah.
And it triggers that center of the brain that's actually tied to things like pleasure and learning and, actually things that we need, like eat and reproducing.
Right.
And so this is something that's deeply ingrained in who we are as a species. And so to be able to kind of see these things get tied together, it's like sky's the limit. So the 152 pounds a year, that's eating a small human of sugar. It's kind of concerning, right?
That's freaky. That's just, I keep using the word freaky,
probably
but
freaky
it's
that I
weird.
reference it eating a human. That's probably bad. But, I think about what weighs 152 pounds. Usually a person would come into mind,
That's true. What is this doing to young people? Because, so all our kids know our diets of 3 pounds of sugar a week. Are you seeing more younger patients, more patients that are minors or kids that have heart problems from overeating?
Yeah, I don't know about minors or kids, but yes, people are presenting earlier with things like high blood pressure, high cholesterol, diabetes because of how they're eating and because of the obesity pandemic, as you put it. This is a real issue. Like, we continue to increase the number of individuals and the percentage of the population that are obese in America every year. It's not going down, it's not going away, it's not stabilizing, it's getting worse.
And doesn't seem like it's going to get better anytime soon, at least not from what you're seeing professionally. I want to talk more about kids and sugar, because I know my son and his friends are constantly craving the grossest sugary treats, and I don't remember my friends and I being that fixated on sugar. I want you to take a look at how one woman we talked with describes the relationship between her grandkids and sugar.
It's like Oreo cookies, and ice cream. They just can't say no, and they love donuts.
That's pretty much every parent sees this. What does this do to a child's brain, all this sugar?
Well, number one, something I want to throw to quickly before that is, think of a good chocolate chip cookie. You know how you make it better? Add a little salt to it.
Yep.
So that whole bliss point concept. But as far as what does all the sugar do to a kid, it's a complex response in terms of, number one, if the kids are always eating sugar, if they're active and they're burning off, okay, cool. But for the amount that they're taking in, and now we see the prevalence of gaming and different things that are more sedentary activities, kids aren't getting out. That's why we have the NFL with Play 60. Like, we have to try to encourage kids to pry them away from screens and get them outside, which is crazy. Growing up, we were out all the time doing things and moving. Right. But the other piece is, so the kid starts to gain weight. Now they're in school, they're eating sugary foods. You're going to have two different negative effects. Number one, you can have self-esteem issues as they start to gain weight, maybe get a little made fun of. That's not great, bullying. The other piece is the attentional capacity. For a child to sit in the classroom and pay attention, it's already a taxing question that we have to ask them to do. When you actually add sugar to that, now you've got this hyperactivity. We wonder, why are we seeing spikes in diagnosis of ADHD? Well, because kids are they have immediate need for gratification with screens and different things.
Right.
I mean, we're setting our kids up for failure left and right in terms of technology and sugar. It's a problematic situation.
This leads into our viewer questions, and I want to get to some of the viewer questions. Dr. Love, Joan wants to know, what do you tell your patients then to avoid falling into the Bliss Point trap?
I think it's like any addiction. There's going to be times where you're going to fall back into these patterns. It's just about really paying attention to what they are and how they affect you, and slowly over time making adjustments to avoid it. I mean, obviously not having it around, not being around it is a great start, but that's not always the case. You may have a spouse or somebody else that you live with that wants to have Oreos in the house, and so you have to find other ways to deal with that, and it's not easy.
I feel like it also starts young in school, Dr. Noelenik, where as a reward, the kids are given a lollipop or Smarties or whatever. Like, again, I don't remember as a kid my teachers giving me candy as a reward. Do you guys remember that? I mean,
not until
and
I think
teachers
like
are
later
awesome.
on.
I'm saying they're just like, it's a good motivator for the kids, but they're coming home with sugar as a reward.
Well, it's also like thinking about going to the dentist office and getting a sucker after that. It's like, well, that made sense. But yeah, no, we do link it. We tie these things together, and so sugar becomes the reward. And it's like, oh, I want to earn that. Sounds great.
I have a question. Kristen Walker and Sarah Ralph had the same question, so I put these together. How do you turn off the bliss point or keep it from being tripped in your own brain? Dr. Noelenik.
Celery.
Celery.
No, I mean, honestly, it's
like,
not.
Like, what do you do?
There isn't a switch. There's no way to turn this off. But I think that education and the more awareness that we have around it, then the better equipped we are to recognize it when we see it coming. So things that you can do, behavioral interventions are, if absolute abstinence from the junk food isn't an option for you, portion control. So it's about personal responsibility. It's saying, all right, I've got this bag of chips that I know is a problem for me.
Right.
I've had whatever kind of day I've had, and I want to have some, put some in a little bowl, like measure the portion. And I think that the trick is to actually look and realize, some people look at the back of the bag and see the calories, like, oh, it's not so bad.
Right.
But then they don't look at what the portion size is. And so it's totally misleading.
Like microwave popcorn. I thought the whole bag was a portion. It's not. I mean, I think that's so unfair because it feels like that would be your portion.
Sure.
Yeah.
It's like 4 portions.
There it is. Yeah.
I'm getting some questions from viewers on Facebook. Angela would like to know, I was on keto for a year before my bypass surgery. I have genetic heart disease. My question is, could the keto way of eating have caused my problems more quickly? And what, for people who aren't familiar with keto, what's keto?
Well, I mean, without getting into the specifics of the diet, I think coronary artery disease is something that's long-standing. It starts as a kid. By the time you're an adolescent or a young adult, you have fatty streaks or buildups of plaque in your heart arteries. It's almost ubiquitous across the United States and really across the world. This happens to people. It's like pouring gasoline on the fire as you continue to eat like this over years and years. And so I don't want to talk about one diet or another because I think it's a little bit more nuanced than that.
Is keto the new Atkins, though, for people who are watching? Is it kind of like that?
I think, yes. I think people use it very similar to that. I don't think keto accelerated this super quickly.
Okay. Joellen has a question. What's worse? And I've gotten this question from other people. Sugar, salt, or fat? I'll go to Dr. Noelenik. Which one is more triggering, sugar, salt, or fat? Do you find anything from talking to your patients?
I think the answer is yes. It's
of them?
The intersection. Yeah, the intersection is going to be the most triggering. But I think that in terms of brain process and response, sugar is going to leap to the front of the class on that one.
Sugar. And what about in your profession, Dr. Love, with the heart? Sugar, salt, or fat? What's worse?
Oh man, it's all of it. Yeah, all of it. I don't know if I can pick one.
Really?
Yeah.
But sugar might be more triggering in the brain.
Well, it's the one that in research has been linked to trigger the same type of responses as an opiate, as a stimulant, and so to a lesser degree.
Yeah.
But certainly in lab rats where they've done experiments, you see the withdrawal effect, you see sensitization, you see all these different things, even cross-sensitization to where if you're having more sugar in your diet, you'll be more likely to invite in other things, almost like a gateway.
Really? Yeah. A gateway? Bridget Fitzgerald wants to know, What can we eat that will make us happy like junk food does, but without the Evil Bliss Point ingredients? Any recommendations? I don't know any.
I think it's back to moderation.
Yeah.
I really think that it's not that you can't eat these foods. It's about doing it in moderation and limiting the amount and not having these frequent binges. So I don't think that you need to cut out things completely. That's pretty difficult and challenging to do. But just limiting your intake, I think, is the way to do it.
Like the portion control that Dr. Noelenik was talking about. And you just answered Julie Kramer's question, which was, everyone wants to know if they have to cut it all out and avoid super delicious food, but they don't. Just don't binge on it.
Yeah,
which is hard when your bliss point is triggered.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a cardiologist. I still eat steak or have barbecue. It's just you don't do it every night, and that's okay. You just need to limit how you do it.
Lynn wants to know from Dr. Noelenik, do you treat food addictions the same way as you treat drug addictions? Do you do the same kind of counseling?
I'm not an addiction specialist, so I'm kind of not the guy for either of those. But I will say that that I think it's a unique. It has to be a different type of treatment because your goal is not absolute abstinence. It's moderation and it's appropriate recognition of the factors underlying, and then also what maintains it. And I think you would want to find a specialist that actually works in that specific area.
Question on Facebook from Angela. This is for Dr. Love. Can Dr. Love explain the reason a woman cannot have HRT with heart disease? What's HRT?
Hormone replacement therapy.
Got it, hormone replacement therapy.
And basically it's just about this milieu that can predispose you to worsening heart disease. And so there's hormonal changes with estrogen and how it all interplays with your coronary arteries and coronary artery disease, and it has to do with that.
Okay. Bonnie has a question. I'll go to Dr. Noelenik for this one. Bonnie writes, some people crave a cigarette or a drink after a tough day, but all I want is brownies. Why?
Because that's your deal.
That's your sugar.
I think, so when we talk about our relationship with substances or with food, it is a very personal journey and it's a personal situation. And so this can go all the way back to your childhood when if you had a bad day and came home from school, your mom or grandmother or somebody, dad, whoever had brownies or fresh baked cookies or something, and it just kind of helped you to feel like the day was done and that you could be okay. So it's about recognizing your own process and I think unfortunately, as much as it sounds like a brownie is a better choice than alcohol or tobacco, which it is, down the road it can still have deleterious effects on your health and your wellness. And so again, it's just going to come back to moderation. There's nothing says that at the end of the day you can't have a little brownie. But the point is, I think it's important to recognize that the brownie didn't make the day better, it didn't make it go away, it doesn't make tomorrow better. But if in that moment it helps you to feel a little bit better, just try to keep moderation in check.
Frank Gatone wrote in, and he has a question about something I hadn't heard about. Frank wants to know if the doctors can talk about something called vanishing caloric density. When something dissolves quickly in your mouth, does it signal your brain to want more? Any of you want to take a crack at that? Dr. Love, you know about that?
I don't know about that, I'm sorry.
So that's a great question.
like Doritos, he said. And that resonated. He said, like Doritos at the end. I thought, oh yeah, they almost dissolve.
I mean, I don't notice them dissolving, but I love chewing them.
Right.
to death. And I'll get more and more. That's one of my weak spots.
That Dorito dust is like magic.
Well, I think Cool Ranch. So I think
right?
I think the real problem is people who eat quickly, or if you are eating fast, you just take in a lot more before you feel full. And so things that are vanishing quickly in your mouth, you're quickly grabbing to put something else in there. And so I think that's more of a bigger issue. If you can spread out the time that you eat dinner or drink water between every bite, you can really make yourself feel full quicker and decrease your overall caloric intake. And
one more question. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
You're fine.
Dr. Love, a question for you. Marie writes, when I was little, my mom told me I was going to, quote, give myself diabetes from eating so much sugar. Is that possible?
Again, not like in a one-time instance. Like if you have a whole row of Oreos, you're not going to develop diabetes. But doing that over time, day in and day out, yes, it's going to lead
to Type 2 diabetes.
Yes,
we're talking about.
exactly, exactly. Type 1 diabetes is different. That's an autoimmune disease. But Type 2 diabetes, yes, over time it leads to obesity and type 2 diabetes, high blood pressure, all of those things.
I want to get our final thoughts on this discussion because clearly it hit a nerve when I've been talking to my friends about this beforehand and from the comments we're getting. Dr. Noelenik, what are your final thoughts for our viewers about the Bliss Point?
Well, okay, so Bliss Point, I think that we need to recognize that it's vastly difficult for people to try to just exercise personal responsibility around this. And I don't mean to try to give people excuses, but as I was kind of doing some research around this, I realized that what we see in terms of when I reference the non-communicable diseases, those are the heart disease, those are diabetes type 2, and other different issues that are linked to the Western diet, the highly ultra-processed food, which means 5 or more ingredients in the food. And the problem that we have here is that we have the information and people, if you look around, aren't really making the right decisions. We're going to bankrupt the healthcare system. We're going to bankrupt Medicare, Social Security, all these things as people are having significant health effects in regard to managing this situation. And so as Americans, we hate to look at regulation, but when an industry isn't willing to take the appropriate steps to be responsible and try to help the public wellness, maybe it's time to put responsibility on the businesses instead of just on ourselves and on the industries and systemic issues. And the proof's in the pudding. If you do the research out there on this stuff, it's legit and it's killing us. So.
And we've done many news stories on food deserts where there are entire neighborhoods where people don't have access to healthy food, and so all they have are go to the convenience store real quick, get everything, and it's all got way more than 5 ingredients.
And not even just availability, but cost.
Right.
Healthy food is more than 2 times as expensive as this garbage, and so we need to keep that in mind, and that starts to feel a little systemic.
Right. Dr. Love, what about you?
Yeah, final thoughts is it's just tough to see the end point of all of this. It's tough to see somebody who's, 55 years old and has had a heart attack, and it's because they just couldn't stop eating and refused to eat right to treat their diabetes or their blood pressure, and seeing that end point is really hard. Some people get affected by it and actually change dramatically how they interact with food and these other things. Some people don't. I mean, it's no different than smoking in a lot of ways. Some people just keep smoking, and it's tough. It's really hard to overcome.
I have a final thought. On a high note, I want to share with you all. I want you to take a look at something beautiful. It's a painting that was donated a few days ago to a very special group of people from a very special family. It was gifted to the Cardiac Intensive Care Unit here at the University of Kansas Health System. Here's who painted it: the son-in-law of a transplant patient named Jim Wagner. Jim and his wife are from Nebraska, and they initially came to the University of Kansas Health System because Jim wanted to get into a clinical trial for his heart issues. But after looking over his echocardiogram, cardiologist Dr. Zubair Shah told Jim, "You don't have time for a trial, you need a new heart, or you're not going to survive." 45 days later, because of this incredible team here, Jim had a new heart. 6 months later is when he came back to donate this gorgeous piece of artwork, donated and painted by his family, as a big thank you to the cardio team that saved his life.
We wanted to come today to present a piece of art so that we could show our appreciation for how we were treated here from top to bottom.
A painting was a great gift. It will be here for always. And there'll be a plaque, and it will remind staff and everybody that sees it and takes a moment that it matters. So it was a beautiful tribute to the staff, to the organization, and it'll be a treasure for always.
Vice President of Cardiac Services, Barbara MacArthur, says she and the rest of the team are just going to treasure this painting and their relationship really with the Wagner family till the end of time. That's just a really neat story. We spent so much time in this episode talking about food, so let's kind of bookend it with this. Let's talk about red meat for just a minute. We live in the Midwest, so yes, we eat a lot of red meat. How do you balance that with heart health? Here's cardiologist Dr. Shannon Hoos Thompson.
I am 4th generation rancher, and we live in the Midwest, and I have a grandma who just turned 90 and have several other relatives and things. So the answer is by itself, no. If you're eating, T-bone steaks and potatoes, 3 meals a day, especially if you're frying it up, it's going to lead to problems. But usually by itself, again, red meats, can you have red meat? Absolutely. But if you stack that on to now I smoke, or if you become a diabetic, and again, you're not eating that salad on the side, you're not having the green beans to go with it, if you're not eating a balanced diet and you're just living on nothing but protein, yeah, that's not good for you.
And that really echoes what we've heard Dr. Love say and Dr. Noelenik about moderation. We are just 6 days away from National Doctors Day, which is March 30th. It's a day to celebrate and honor and say thank you to our doctors. We have a fantastic way you and your family can send a thank you. On your screen right now is a QR code. Scan it. It automatically fills in all the information you need to send us a little thank you video to our doctors. So just follow the instructions in the notes of the email that pop up. Be sure to include your name and your hometown, and make sure your video is no longer than 30 seconds max. We will show those videos and messages right here on air on the Medical News Network. Can't wait to see what you send, and thank our doctors. And thank you for being with us today. Next week on All Things Heart, you'll meet a man who missed all the signs of heart trouble.
I kept telling him, you need to go see your doctor. There's no reason not to go see a doctor.
Even his smartwatch told him there was something wrong, and he thought his watch was broken. Wait till you see how the busy father of 3 finally did learn he was incredibly close to dying, and the unique way doctors kept his heart pumping. That's next Thursday morning on All Things Heart. We'll see you at 10 a.m.